Mr. Bedlam.
So this story happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it is the single most mind-boggling thing that I have ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I am from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like if you get stuck outside, you will die kinda cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house and even immediately outside of it. Well, me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went from work straight to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers, so me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, oh shit, and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night. She was, I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out, "Mio Sanbu? Anyone home?" I yell back up the stairs, yep. Just hanging out in the basement. I hear a few more steps move from the garage door towards the stairs, and she yells out again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle, "Yep. Give me just a minute." Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. "Anyone down there with you?" She yelled back in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all family and friends, and the voice, it was just wrong, like it sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't put my finger on. Weirded out, I replied back, "Just Colton." After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something isn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door to garage is and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black, pitch black. All of the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, "Mom, where are you?" There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles, and my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. Colton asked, "What's wrong?" "My mom's not home," I reply as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking with her?" I could see the confusion in his face. "There's no one home. We need to leave now." I took a few steps towards the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. Colton asked, "Are we leaving?" Still confused as all hell. "No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm going to call my mom and figure this out." I pull out my phone and call my mom. She answers me, "Oh, Sanbu? What's going on?" I reply back frantically, "Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level, and when I went up, you weren't there?" Hoping she's not playing a joke. "No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay?" "What do you mean you heard me?" I fill her in on the whole story, and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home, but before she did, you could hear something upstairs, not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next, and the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predatory presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us, but this is the easiest to write down, and one that I was happy to have a witness. My mother has passed away now, and I have moved away to Arizona, but whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what had happened. I will never truly know what happened, but I know that whatever it was that had my mother's voice, it was evil, and it was hungry.
I've experienced many odd and unexplainable events in my life, but this event has been on my mind for a few years now, and I finally decided to tell it. And I pray I'm not the only one who's experienced something like this, so let's start from the beginning. I graduated from high school in 2019 and was promoted to supervisor for a kitchen in a nursing home down the street. Since I oversaw dinner, I didn't start work until about 3:30 p.m. and would get home around 10 p.m. So for the first half of the day, I would be completely home alone. I enjoyed that time. Solitude was always nice, especially when you're as introverted as I am. Normally I would sleep in until about noon, but this time I decided to relax on the couch in our main living room and watch Kitchen Nightmares. I remembered nodding off and falling into a light sleep, so any small noise would wake me up. The first few times I cracked my eyes open, it would just be from the cats jumping on me, so when I felt the cushion by my feet dip a bit, I figured it was my cat Peach. After a moment I opened my eyes and realized my younger sister was sitting at the end of the couch, her back to me. I was half asleep, so I really didn't think much of it. I figured she just stayed home from school sick. So I just asked her if she could move her head so I could see the TV, but she ignored me. Still facing the TV screen, annoyed, I asked her why she was home. Once again she remained silent, coming to the conclusion that she was just being rude. Again I closed my eyes and fell back asleep. After about another hour I got up and started to get ready for work and noticed my sister wasn't in the room or in the house. Concerned, I called her. After trying to call her a few times and getting nothing, I called my mother. She picked up and I asked her if Sis told her where she was going. My mother, confused, asked me what I was talking about. She dropped Sis off at school before going to work. My sister had been at school this whole time. In shock, I hung up and kept this to myself, convinced I was losing my mind. That it was all in my head, but I remember that moment so vividly. What my sister was wearing, how she was sitting, how I felt a shift in the couch when she sat down. This wasn't a dream, this was real, it had to be. There was something in my house with me that morning, and it was not my sister. I kept this experience to myself. As a kid, I had what my parents called a very active imagination. Always seeing things, hearing things, and being easily spooked. So I think it got to the point where I just convinced myself this whole experience didn't happen and that there was some rational explanation. It actually took me a few years to tell my little sister about this. Once again, mostly out of fear of being perceived as crazy, and I didn't want to spook my sister. But something she said to me changed that real fast. This takes place in September 2022. My sister and I were waiting in line for a ride at a local amusement park. Every year my dad's workplace would rent the whole park for employees and their families. We spent most of the day together as a family, but about an hour before closing, Sis and I went to the back of the park to ride some night rides, so it was just the two of us and the waiting was getting terribly boring. Sis and I aren't very close and don't have much in common, so we struggled to have a conversation and for the most part stood in silence, but out of the blue she spoke up. "Kat, want to hear something freaky?" As a lover of all things spooky, that caught my attention, so I immediately replied with an eager yes. And a part of me wishes I said no. My sister is a night owl, and over the summer would stay up until 6 a.m. I had just started working a different job after quitting my nursing home position. That's another scary story for a different day, so I was starting to go to bed at 12 a.m. every night and would be up around 10 a.m. So she would be the only one awake. One night she noticed light coming from the crack in her bedroom door, and she heard both my voice and our mother's voices talking. Only it was hard to understand, as if we were either speaking too quickly or just complete gibberish. She quickly grabbed her phone, checking the time, and her confusion only grew when she noted it was 3 a.m. What were we doing awake? She thought. Sometimes my mom and I would go to the front window if the weather was bad during the night to keep an eye on the storm, or if there were sirens. We both have a habit of being very nosy, so she figured that's what was going on. After a few minutes she could still hear the voices and still see the lights, growing curious. She got out of bed and opened her bedroom door and rushed into the hall expecting to see me and my mother by the window talking. Only that's not what she saw. There were no lights on, it was completely dark besides the illumination from her phone screen, and there was no one in sight. Not our mother, not me. Not even the cats were out there, unsettled and confused. She turned to my bedroom door thinking I was messing with her. She opened my door and I was asleep with both cats. She goes back in the hall, Mom and Dad's bedroom door is also shut. She peeks in there and both are sleeping. Now, my sister is a rational person. She was always the one to go in the basement first, tell the others that monsters and ghosts aren't real. So she completely pushed this event out of her mind, because in her eyes it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she was just overtired, or our grandfather's TV downstairs was a bit loud and that's what she heard. But like my own experience, this kind of sat at the back of her head, and the house grew to be a little less comfortable. She mentioned how after that she felt like there was always someone watching, as if they were tucked in a corner just observing her. She wasn't scared out of her mind, just a bit confused. When she told me that a pit in my stomach opened up and I had chills, I laughed at first because come on, we were in public and I didn't want to flip out. So we went on the ride, and for the remaining time the park was open, we pushed that conversation on the back burner. On our way to meet up with our parents, we started talking about it again, and I finally told her about what happened to me. How I saw her at home that day, spoke to her, and could remember what she wore. That was the first time I saw her get scared. I wasn't home, she kept saying. What do you think it was then? We still don't know. We don't know if we want to know. The only thing we are sure of is there is something in our house. So for a bit of context, I am now a 19-year-old female, and during my senior year of high school, I was living with my aunt to finish out my last 3 weeks of high school as I was graduating early. Living in the house was me, my aunt, her husband, my cousin we will call Heather, who is an 11-year-old female. For some background, we lived in a very rural area, and the house was from the era when slavery was still in place, with 2 stories. There was the main staircase up to my aunt's and uncle's room, and the one me and my cousin shared, as well as a balcony that was situated in between. Then there was a secondary staircase up to the original servants' quarters, an area that was under construction as it was completely separated from the rest of the house, having only that staircase as an entrance and exit. No way to access the rest of the second floor from that area, as well as the attic, which is only accessible from the servants' quarters. I was home alone as I was under quarantine since it was in the midst of COVID and my father had contracted it, while my cousin, aunt, and uncle were 2 hours away picking up my other cousin from the airport with her husband. My cousin had pestered me multiple times with stories about the 2 sisters who owned the home back when it was a plantation and swore up and down the house was haunted. Me being several years older than her always brushed it off as her imagination and there being no truth behind the bizarre stories, but that day I started to question whether or not they were true. It was the early afternoon around 3 p.m. and it was still light out, and I had my laptop in my lap drawing and listening to music as I did homework. Seeing as I was home alone, I decided to take advantage of having my music all the way up in my headphones, causing the music to sound like it was coming from a speaker when I took the headphones off, since I'd be bothering my cousin if she had been home. This was normal for me to do when no one was around, and this wasn't the first time I had been alone at the house. This day was different, however, because out of nowhere I heard a loud thud coming from above me, and it had to have been really loud if I could hear it over the music blaring in my headphones. I took off said headphones and looked up at the ceiling thinking maybe there was a squirrel or something up there, which wasn't uncommon. When I heard nothing after a while, I put my headphones back on, only to hear the same loud thud a few minutes later. I again took off my headphones and got up, waiting as still as possible to hear if the thud happened again. It did. Only this time it came from outside the room, as if it was on the balcony. Of course, I knew that couldn't be true since the entrance to the balcony was sealed and hadn't been used in years because the balcony itself was unstable and needed to be redone. So this couldn't be a person. I decided to leave the room and look out the window of the door to the balcony only to see nothing. No squirrel, no person, nothing. About now I was getting annoyed. Whatever was making the noises were disrupting my concentration and I needed to finish my homework. I went back to the bedroom and sat down, trying once again to concentrate and finish my work. Only as soon as I sat down, the thud came from the other side of my cousin's closet where the original servants' quarters were, which is sealed. A solid wall. No way to access it unless I went all the way downstairs and through the stairs in the kitchen. Thinking this meant my family was home and my aunt was showing my other cousin the area that would be her and her family's room, I decided, fine, I'll take a break and go say hi. Only when I got downstairs, looked outside, there was no car. I was still the only one home. So against all the instincts, I had to just bolt outside. I instead opened the door to the stairway leading to the sealed area of the house. Went upstairs, and when I finally entered the completely cleared out open empty space, I saw absolutely nothing at first. There aren't any windows on this side of the house, and so I tried to flip on the lights to no avail. So I turned on my phone's flashlight only to have the daylight scared out of me. Walking around in a completely perfect circle in the center of the room was a woman. Thin and tall with dark stringy hair and a tattered dress. As soon as the light hit her, she stopped and I could hear her neck crack as she turned her head suddenly to look at me. I bolted down the stairs, my feet touching maybe 3 or 4 of the entire flight, slamming the door to the staircase and locking it from the outside, which is the only way to do so. I hear slamming against the door and bolted to the bathroom through the kitchen, slamming the door behind me, locking it and curling up in the tub, keeping the curtain closed as I tried to call my aunt, terrified. She never picked up. I stayed in the tub until my family got home and waited until I heard them calling for me before I even peeked out the curtain and got out to greet them. I explained what happened and my aunt's response was, "Oh, you met Maggie? Don't mind her, it's best to ignore her. She won't hurt you, she just likes to try and scare people." To this day I've never seen Maggie again and I won't stay the night in their house anymore. They have since set up the servants' quarters for my other cousin and her family and removed the wall between Heather's closet and the servants' quarters so that the top floor is connected.